All right, so we're going to take a look at the digestive system. This is chapter 22. We've just done the diagram over on the board, and so now we're going to take a look at the rest of the body system and fill in some of the details from the diagram that we just finished off. Now, you may hear a little background noise, and I apologize about that. The guys over in maintenance have a little Aerosmith pumping out, and it's kind of coming through the top of the windows that are there. We're in the lab right now because at this point that's about the most convenient place that I can find to do this. You may have seen or heard on the first set of tapings when I did the actual layout on the board, the cleaner came in and wanted to clean the lab, and so can't really say no because I'm basically taking up the lab, and she's not going to be here the next couple of days, so we let her do that, so no big deal. When we look at the digestive system, human digestive system, so we're going to start with oral cavity, and we're going to work our way all the way to the anus. We've already kind of discussed that on the board over here, so we should be in pretty good shape that way. Let me adjust real quickly. I want to slide this camera just a little bit. So I apologize, but I'm kind of working on let's see how that does. All right. Okay, so here we go. This will be on the exam. I'll do my best to stay close to the camera so that you can get some good audio on this. This definitely will be a test question on the exam. And basically it's the introductory to and the component pieces and features and the divisions of the digestive system. So we have two major divisions. One is called the alimentary canal. And the alimentary canal contains everything from the oral cavity to the anus. Now, when we think of the alimentary canal, it is all organs that are accepting and breaking down the food product that you eat. You break down the food product that you eat to be able to provide nutrients, macromolecules for food, and for building blocks. And we'll talk more about that when we get to nutrition tomorrow. The alimentary canal contains the oral cavity, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, large and small intestine, and all of the parts contained there. So really, when we talk about the alimentary canal, oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. In theory, anything that comes into that oral cavity that then progresses through and is removed as waste is never considered to really be in the body. Okay? The accessory organs that help out the breakdown of the food and the absorption of that food product, salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So make sure that you know what is alimentary canal versus accessory organs. The alimentary canal basically means that materials that are being brought in and leaving as residual waste never actually are considered to be component pieces that are found in the body. Okay, it's just an open tubing system. Let's talk about the 5 phases or steps of digestion. You have to know these, okay? So there are some component vocabulary that you will have to know and some basic concepts that will be tested. So here are the 5 steps of digestion. Number 1 is called ingestion, and we're actually just taking food into the body, okay? So that's where it enters the oral cavity. Number 2 is called digestion. Now, in between that ingestion and digestion, a couple of different steps that are involved. Number 1, secretions. Secretions of what, man? Go back to the salivary glands. When we talk about the salivary glands, there's a large amount of saliva that is released into the mouth that helps to break down the food product that you put into your mouth. There are enzymes that are contained within it. There is a little bit of acid that helps to break down. So the pH of your saliva is more like 6.8 to 6.9. There are a number of lysosomes, and that's where that kind of acidic action comes from. There's a lot of mucus to coat and to lubricate that material that will eventually become the bolus. And so there are a number of secretions that you'll find inside the oral cavity. Secondly, what we call mechanical and chemical digestion. There are two very, very different formats for which we're breaking down food. Number one is called mechanical. As we go through this lecture, you will hear me talk about mechanical and chemical digestion on a regular basis, okay? When we talk about mechanical digestion, we're talking about physically breaking down that food-based product into smaller pieces. It's through a process called mastication. Mastication means to chew. Please make sure you have that. It will be a test question somewhere. Okay, so the chewing and the mechanical breaking apart is actually accomplished by our teeth, and we'll talk about that as we get into looking at the teeth. The second format is called chemical digestion, in which chemicals are infused into our food-based products to break them down. We already talked about the salivary glands. We talked about the enzymes that are in there to break food products down. We also talked about the lysozymes, which are a type of very weak-based acid that will also begin to break down the component pieces of the food. It also, the lysozymes are there to provide an antimicrobial protective mechanism to try and break down and eliminate some of the microbes that are coming in through our food sources. The third concept that we need to talk about. So when we talk about that digestion and breaking into carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, further breaking those down into their constituent component pieces of glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, that digestion that begins, and we talked about it when you look at your big roadmap of the digestive system, we looked at peristalsis beginning in the pharynx. So once that bolus is swallowed, by the way, you have to know the clinical term for swallowing. Swallowing is called deglutition, D-E-G-L-U-T-T-I-T-I-O-N, glutition. Okay, so deglutition is swallowing. That propulsion or peristalsis. Peristalsis is the smooth muscle, wave-like actions that push our food in a forward direction. Peristalsis begins in the esophagus and continues all the way through the anus. And about every 30 minutes, you get a good contractive wave from that smooth muscle that will push food through. That fourth component is called assimilation. Assimilation is absorption, okay? So they have assimilation here. I will take absorption as an answer. That works just fine for me, okay? In absorption, nutrients are uptaken through the wall, intestinal villi, along with the microvilli that are laying on top. And 80% of this absorption occurs in the ileum and jejunum, in which you find those big finger-like projections called villi, with the microvilli sitting right on top of them. That brings us to the last step in this process. Now, you may also hear it referred to as compaction, and compaction leading to defecation, okay? So ingestion, digestion, absorption, compaction, defecation. This is what the alimentary canal looks like. And again, we're looking at the histology and we're looking at the cross-section of muscle that's there. Just like all the other layers that we've seen, here is our lumen with its nice open area surrounded by epithelium called the mucosa, surrounded by this stuff right here called the submucosa. Now, the submucosa does not have a muscle-based component to it. It is simply just blood and lymphatic tissues along with dense irregular connective tissue, and it allows for some expansion and contraction because food product that's moving through the area is going to have to be accommodated for with the amount of material that you're moving. Here's what's called the muscularis externa, and that's that outside layer. And what you're finding, what I really want to point out, is what's called the myenteric plexus. The myenteric plexus is a network of nerves that are laid down in that muscle-based material, creating that external tubing system that will accommodate the expansion and contraction, but also will stimulate the absorption. So we talked at length in the first semester about the enteric nervous system. E-N-T-E-R-I-C, enteric. The enteric nervous system is that nervous system that's embedded directly into the digestive system that controls all of the function of the digestive system. Now, we said that it is not under neurological control from the central nervous system. However, compatibly they work together, and the enteric nervous system actually helps to control the central nervous system by what it's absorbing up and the nutrients that it's feeding to the brain. Okay, so there's the enteric nervous system, and again, found in the esophagus, the stomach, the intestines, regulating digestive motility, secretions, and blood flow. There are more than 100 million neurons. It is one of the most complex portions of the digestive system. It does function independently. However, it does heavily influence the central nervous system. Now, what you do need to know for the exam, because it will be on the exam, this is often considered to be part of the autonomic nervous system, rest and digest. We call it rest and digest for a reason. Okay? With the autonomic nervous system, please remember that during peristalsis, we are in the we're in the parasympathetic phase. Food is digesting easily. Heart rate is low. Respirations are low. Therefore, lots of blood gets shuttled into this area to be able to take care of the breaking down of the component food parts to be absorbed up and used as fuels or building blocks. Okay. They're the two plexi. I'm not as concerned about you knowing the plexi. What I do want you to know is that it is a very large network of nervous system-based tissues. We're going to switch gears and start looking at some of the anatomy. So what you actually see here is part of that myenteric plexus that's connecting that small intestine together. Now, embedded in these layers, large amounts of blood vessels as well as nerves to accommodate the stimulation of the movement of materials through that area. Laying over the top, you will find a large protective layer, almost like an apron, coating that small intestine so that damage to, number one, internal damage from anterior trauma is prevented. Number two, it anchors all of that small intestine into one location, and it prevents it from, so it's a tacking feature. It prevents it from moving around, okay? So what you see is called the greater omentum, and the greater omentum is actually made of it's fatty connective tissue. But embedded in that fatty connective tissue, you will find a large blood supply that is serving the small intestine. So the greater omentum, this guy right here, the greater omentum, number one, anchors the small intestine. Number two, it protects the small intestine. And number three, if needed, now this is not very common, we don't see it often, however it does occur. If we do need some nutrient sources, those nutrient sources or that lipid-based material could be turned into a nutrient source and used as fuels. The lesser omentum right here between the stomach and the liver. That lesser omentum also is there to anchor the stomach and to keep the stomach and the liver in close proximity to each other so that they don't get injured floating away. Okay. The other thing I want to point out, and we looked at it on the board, but there is my liver with my stomach, the lesser omentum. See that guy right there? The little green thing? That is the gallbladder. And the gallbladder is going to come down here and infiltrate right into the duodenum, and we'll talk about why here in just a little bit. The mesenteries. And so we had just looked at this right here. This stuff right here is called the mesentery. And the mesentery is the connective tissue that keeps all of the small intestine together, as well as the large, look at the large blood supply that's there. Okay, so the mesenteries, and they call it the mesocolon, as long as you understand that this mesentery is connective tissue that's adhering and keeping all of this ileum and jejunum together in one place, so that the surface area, the extensions of the surface area, folded so that it can fit it nicely into that space. The mesocolon is anchoring the large intestine as well as the small intestine to the posterior wall, or to the peritoneum on the posterior wall. Let's talk about the neural control. Okay, real quickly. We need to talk about the 3 phases in which food goes through digestion. This happens to be the neural component of it, and there are 3 phases of ingestion, starting with the neural control. Okay, number 1 is what we call the cephalic phase, found in the brain. You think about food, you taste food, you visualize food, you smell food, you start drooling. That message is sent to the hypothalamus to initiate cranial nerve 10 to start secreting hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Okay, so this whole process of ingestion begins in the brain, in which food looks good. Let's go ahead and trigger some of the chemical components to start breaking down our food product. The second phase of neural control is called the gastric phase. Okay, and the gastric phase causes stretch reflex inside the stomach, and it will also increase the level of hydrochloric acid that's being emitted into the stomach. So, number 1, it allows for a little bit of expansion of the stomach, and number 2, it dumps a whole bunch of hydrochloric acid, or it produces a whole lot of hydrochloric acid to be able to start breaking food down when it enters as that bolus. The third phase is called the intestinal phase, and we've now transitioned that food into the duodenum and onto the small